So before the current crisis in Syria, what was the position of Israel towards the Assad regime before the crisis?
When the protests began in Syria in March of 2011, Israel was completely shocked, meaning that all the main political and security analysts were looking at the unfolding of the Arab awakening and were basically saying, well, we were surprised about Tunisia because we don't follow Tunisia very closely. And we were surprised about Egypt because we thought Mubarak was almighty and powerful. But we're really sure that no one is going to be able to touch Assad because his system is so entrenched, so based on coercion. He has shown such little tolerance for internal protest. And of course, if you look at his father's legacy, that is a legacy of zero tolerance regarding internal protest or dissent. So basically, most Israelis were saying there is no way that Syria is going to be the theater of massive social and political mobilization. So it was quite remarkable in the first few weeks to read all these old analysts, old established professors, basically writing in their newspapers that they didn't understand how this was possible. So it was a big shock, which kind of, I think it means that in the months before the crisis, Israel wasn't really looking so much at Syria internally, because there were signs. Actually, I think since 2000, there was sign of a rising internal opposition in Syria. Of course, it was small, but it was there. But I think it wasn't so much part of the central concern.
Was there some contacts between also Israel officials and Syrian officials?
Contacts has always been happening. Contacts has always been happening, but after the real failure of the negotiation with Syria, which was before Bashar al-Assad came to power, so in the late 90s and in the late 90s, before that happened, there were much more intense contacts. After, there's always been a channel, because there are channels virtually to every country and player in the region. The channels are not public, they are not emphasized for obvious reasons, but if the two parties want to communicate, there is a way. And this applies to Syria, applies to Hamas, applies to everybody.
And so today, there is still a channel?
As far as I understand, and I don't have the access to the privileged information, of course, because I'm not part of the government, but as far as I understand right now, basically Israel is in the same position as the rest of the international community, kind of looking from outside and trying to understand what's happening, meaning the actual level of communication or even intelligence from the ground is much more limited since the conflict started.
Yeah, so the relations changed because of this conflict, the happening of this conflict.
I would say that there wasn't much of a relations in the past few years to begin with. I would say that there wasn't an expectation that negotiations with Syria would lead anywhere. There wasn't a political will to make these negotiations. So there wasn't any real serious interest in moving things forward with Syria, as far as I understand. Which means that from a frozen political process to a frozen relations, we shifted after the conflict began to more of the same, so to speak. I think, if anything, today we would say that the relationship is worse because Israel, although not openly, has not sided with Assad. They haven't openly said we do want a regime change in Syria, but if you read between the lines, Israel does not want Assad to stay. So if there is no relationship, but if there was, it wouldn't be good at this point.
And how Israel sees Bashar al-Assad as a person?
Well, they see it, I mean, again, I think there are different, of course, ways of looking at him from different parts of the government, but in general, what I hear a lot is his father had a lot more skills, had a lot more strategic depth. He knew when to take risks and when not to take risks, and Bashar al-Assad is a little bit more green, so to speak, so he makes more mistakes. And that's more on the strategic side. Then, of course, there is the humanitarian side. At this point, after watching more than 80,000 people being butchered, there is I don't think there is any any other feeling but condemnation and just horror towards what's happening in Syria. So even if before it wasn't well liked or particularly respected, I assume that after 2 years of looking at what's happening in Syria, there is really nothing positive that can be said about these leadership skills.
And how Israel sees the Ba'ath Party?
There is a bit of a trouble sometimes to make a distinction, I think, from the Israeli government's perspective, which is understandable because governments tend to want to find one address, one person to speak to, and they work on the assumption that that person is really representative of everybody, which of course is a fiction because no one can really represent everybody, and even the Ba'ath Party is more complex than meet the eye. It's not just Assad. But for all intents and purposes, the two things are combined. So when Israel talks about the Syrian regime, they mean Assad and the Ba'ath Party, and some Israeli officials may even include the Alawite community. I don't mean to say that I agree, because I think it's an oversimplification, but that's the lens. Assad represents basically all these actors.
Would you say that Israel endorses and support a regime change in Syria now?
I would say that when the crisis began, Israel at the decision-making level was very torn. There were very prominent Israelis saying, we really don't want regime change, basically taking the same position Israel took at the beginning of the revolutions in Egypt, saying the status quo is convenient for us because we don't know what's coming next, and because more or less we have a working relationship with Mubarak. For Syria, there were quite a few people saying the same. We will never get to peace with Syria through Assad because he's not interested, but at least we won't have any war. He's very much risk adverse. He does not want to have any confrontation with Israel, and not proper border, but the delimitation line, the demarcation line between Syria and Israel is the quietest border of all for Israel. So basically they were saying, why would we want to trade this calm for something far less known? But these voices have been gradually dying out as the war continues. And I would say that from what I understand right now, Israel is saying, one, there's no point in saying we want Assad because it's like betting on a dead horse anyways. There is no way he's staying at the end of this. And two, we're not so sure we really want it, and a regime change may actually be better.
Why, for example, Israel would support a change in Syria and didn't, for example, support change in Tunisia or Jordan, for example?
The Israeli government, I think, because they're looking at a very different understanding of national interest. For Tunisia, I think it's very peripheral. Israel and Tunisia have had frozen relations anyways. It's not a cornerstone of Israel's national security. Egypt is a different story. The peace treaty with Egypt is the cornerstone of Israel's national security doctrine. And as such, Israel is very nervous about anything that could challenge that peace. And the same goes for Jordan, of course. So seeing Mubarak go just raised doubts from within the Israeli government about, will we still have a partner? Will the new government be as willing to engage with us and to have military and security cooperation? It turns out that, yes, the security and military cooperation between Israel and Egypt continues because it's more or less the same people. The rest of the relations is worse, politically or economically, but overall there hasn't been that earthquake that some of the more pessimistic Israelis were looking at. So there has been a different consideration. With Syria, I think there is a different calculus. And the calculus is not just, will we have a partner the day after, but the calculus is regional, meaning Assad is the main Arab ally of Iran, which is Israel's greatest foe at the moment. So I think the calculation is, if Assad goes, Iran gets delivered a very powerful blow. And not just Iran, but also Iran's closest ally in Lebanon, Hezbollah. Syria is the route, not just for supply of weapons to Hezbollah, but Syria is also that connecting link and has been a very strong member of what the Iranians once said was their resistance axis. So that is the difference for the Israeli government.
Because some officials said that the fall of the Assad regime may have some good benefits for Israel. This is also your opinion?
Well, I take a different stand. My stand is that any regime which is unrepresentative and which the people that are in Syria don't want is a regime that shouldn't stay. So I have a different opinion, and my opinion is also based that a regime that on a daily basis perpetrates war crimes is a regime that I don't consider to be legitimate. And I think it will be up to the Syrians to sit down at the table and devise what the future of their country looks like. So I'm not being part of the Israeli government. I have a different set of priorities. One is I don't want to see my northern neighbor being in the midst of this bloody civil war, which has so far had such deep humanitarian consequence. Just today, the UN would say 1 in 3 Syrians needs humanitarian aid. This is something that should be really great cause for introspection regarding arguing for one government or the other government. I think we should just argue first for the end of the conflict and for the end of the violence. And then I think what would be better would probably be some sort of power sharing arrangement, so a political deal. That is my point of view. Israeli government, of course, has a different set of priorities. The priority is quiet with Syria, so no military threat, conventional or unconventional. And I think at this point there is the understanding that if Assad goes, Iran is weaker. And right now Israel is very much interested in anything that could weaken Iran. And let's not forget Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a very big part of the calculus. Israel is very nervous about the potential of Hezbollah being transferred sophisticated weaponry, the chemical weapons, of course. And the idea of Assad going makes the day after a little bit easier from this point of view for Israel, because you have a weaker Iran and a weaker Hezbollah. And I think right now the calculus is that this potential benefit outweighs the risk of seeing the rise of a radical, and by radical I mean, of course, the part of the opposition that is more affiliated with the Salafis and all the groups that have been widely covered in the news lately. So I think that outweighs the risk of them coming to power.
So it's more for Israeli government, I mean, it's more a way to just overthrow the regime, or is it also a way to change other stuff in Syria, like maybe the political system or the economic system?
Well, I think Israel can't do anything to change or to affect the dynamics. Israel doesn't, I think sometimes Israel is given a little bit too much, it's depicted more powerful than what it actually is. I don't think Israel has the power to go into Syria and determine who wins. This is an internal struggle. Some members of the international community have had quite a weight in influencing this struggle on both sides, supporting either Assad or the opposition. Israel per se is looking at this from the sidelines. I don't think it can do much to change the reality, but of course it can desire a preferred outcome, but it doesn't really have the means to translate this desire into reality. So I think Israel's power is very limited on Syria.
Before the crisis, was the Syrian army a threat to the Israeli army?
So the Syrian army, as opposed to many other regional armies, is actually a very serious army, I would say. Just in terms of equipment, training, it could be a real foe to Israel in the context of a conventional conflict. But the could here is the really important word, meaning, yes, it could, but there was no interest from the Syrian regime to launch any type of military confrontation against Israel before the conflict. And you can see this by looking at how many incidents of border exchange, of exchange of fire across the border there have been in the past few decades, and you will see there are basically none. So the Syrian regime had this double, on the one hand, very important to play the Israeli card for both domestic and regional standing. So Syria as one of the main representatives, not just defender of the Palestinians, but also one of the main representatives of this Arab response to Israel. So that was very effective in terms of the foreign policy. But if you look at what actually Syria did, there was no real conventional threat. No one in his right mind in Israel in 2008 or 2009 would have ever expected any sort of military threat coming from Syria.
And today?
Today, I think it's different. I think, first of all, in the midst of such a bloody civil war, the idea that Assad could just decide to tell his army to turn towards Israel makes very little sense. His army is busy. He's busy massacring his own people, and he's busy basically fighting for survival. So the conventional threat is not there. What Israel is more worried about, and I think that is more plausible, is about asymmetric, unconventional threats, and not really in this stage of the civil war. Basically, what I mean is, the more the war continues, the more radical elements of the opposition are empowered, and we see this in the past few weeks with the rise of, with the official merger of al-Nusra and the pledging of allegiance to Al-Qaeda and all these developments. Although I don't think it's realistic to think that after Assad goes, these groups will take power. I don't think that's realistic because they don't represent a majority of Syrians. What is more realistic is you would have some small units attempting some type of attack against Israel, sort of like what happens in Sinai, here and then, because it would be very hard to ascertain central control in the day after Assad goes, meaning it takes time to put a country back together after a civil war. So the lack of control of authority on the areas bordering the Golan could lead to some sort of asymmetric threat. But that's very different from saying or thinking that Syrian tanks could try to cross the border. That is unrealistic.
In this context of conflict, do you think that Israel can target directly or indirectly the Syrian military inside Syria?
Well, two different questions is whether I think they can and whether I think they should. So in terms of they can, I think Israel policy has been clear on this and has been, we have no interest in getting dragged in. We don't want to be a part of this conflict because the Syrian army is disintegrating under our own eyes. This was a prior enemy and they're disintegrating under our very own eyes. Why would we want to intervene? So there is no policy about direct intervention targeting the Syrian army, like being a part in the struggle. What there is, and you have seen it a couple of months ago with the strike against the weapons convoy, that's different. That's about sticking to the red lines Israel gave, and Israel gave two red lines: use of chemical weapons in a way that could hurt Israel, or transfer of sophisticated weaponry and such chemical weapons to Hezbollah. And I think that strike was more signaling to the Syrian regime that they mean business, meaning that they mean to conduct these targets in the future if they have information regarding such transfers of weapons. But that's very different. That's not really being involved in the conflict as Israel sees it, because Israel thinks that even if there was one or two strikes aimed at preventing transfer of weapons, these strikes wouldn't trigger a larger response, because Israel thinks Assad is busy fighting his war, Hezbollah is busy fighting the war with Assad and taking care of his domestic problems in Lebanon. They don't have the interest right now to respond.
Was it also Israel who was behind, which was behind the military research center, was targeted near Damascus?
Well, here what you know is not much better than what I know, because I'm not a military analyst. So, from reading between the lines of Israelis' statements, then I think it would be a fair assumption to say that these targets were originated from here. It hasn't been confirmed, but it also has been implicitly confirmed on a number of occasions. For example, Israeli Defense Minister Barak in the Munich Security Conference in February said something that was taken by many analysts as an implicit confirmation that Israel did the strike.
And so these kind of strikes or targeting, we can see them happening again?
I wouldn't say no. I wouldn't say there is no chance it will happen again. It might happen again. I don't think it would happen recurrently. Meaning, I think the calculation is, if there are too many of these targeted strikes against Syrian advanced weaponry, it may actually escalate into something that Israel has no intention of doing, which is being dragged into the conflict. So basically, they're trying to walk this really fine line between stopping transfers of weapons to Hezbollah without getting any reaction, and going too far and becoming part of the conflict. It's such a thin line that it's very. I think it's wise to argue for restraint rather than to edge your bets and have many of these kind of strikes. But I cannot exclude it, especially with the recent reports of Israel confirming the use of chemical weapons.
And so how do you see also the Israeli military preparations in the Golan Heights?
So I think you can see that there's been a boosting of defense mostly, but that's not, I wouldn't say that this is something necessarily new, meaning I don't think this is something that is particularly has changed in the past year and a half. In the past year and a half, I think there is a heightened awareness that the Golan may be a source of some type of threat to Israel, not conventional, as I said before. Mostly, we could have situations like Sinai, and so there is because of this heightened awareness, there is a heightened defense. So I think they've been boosting defense, and also there's been a few episodes of crossfire. Of course, this is important to remember that the episodes of crossfires with Israel are basically negligible if you compare what's been happening with the border with Lebanon, where crossfires are basically the rule rather than the exception. So there's been far less spillover here than in the rest of the region, of course.
Is it true also that the Israeli military is ready to create maybe a security belt inside Syria?
I heard this option. I haven't heard it from people who would do it, though. So that's very different. I mean, everybody can come and argue for security solutions, but the actual people that are in charge of implementing these solutions, I think that the calculation, the principle is Israel does not want to be a party in this conflict, and Israel should not by no means become a party in this conflict. And of course, this creation of a security corridor or whatever other fancy name you want to give to territorial occupation, that is very much being involved in the conflict. I think that would be definitely something that Israel has no interest in pursuing. And you can see it even if you look at the last round of confrontation with Hamas, how much internal debate there was over a ground operation. Israelis have no interest in a ground operation, and far less in going to occupy yet another area of the region.
You already spoke a little bit about it, but I will ask you again. If the Assad regime falls, what will be the consequences with Iran, Hezbollah, and Palestinian groups?
Okay. If the Assad regime comes to collapse, to implode, as it's likely that will happen. Don't know when, but it's likely that will happen. I think its effect would be felt across the region. So firstly, it would be felt in Tehran, because Assad has been the historical Arab ally of Iran. So that would somewhat, I think, tarnish their calculation for Iranian power and influence in the region. So I think it would be something particularly negative for them, which is why they're now very much involved in supporting Assad in any shape or form that they can. It would also similarly be a problematic development for Hezbollah. Syria has played such an important role in backing Hezbollah within Lebanon, in making sure that Hezbollah wasn't disarmed, in making sure that Hezbollah's resistance was recognized as the national resistance, and that no one would attempt to treat them as a militia and try to disarm them. So Syria's Hezbollah's relation has been very instrumental in Hezbollah's rise in Lebanon. And if Assad goes, it would definitely be a new Lebanon. It would be those who have been opposing Syria and Assad since since really Syria's withdrawal in 2005. So there would be strengthening the March 14 coalition. And it would be definitely weakening Hezbollah's claims of power and its legitimacy. So it would definitely give a second wind to the independence intifada of 2005, I think. And that's problematic for Hezbollah. So it would affect negatively Iran. It would affect negatively Hezbollah. It wouldn't affect that much Hamas. Hamas had already a very big trouble. A lot of conflict there was a lot of conflict between Syria and Hamas, because of course Hamas didn't want to stand, and by Syria I mean the regime, of course, because Hamas didn't want to stand behind Assad, and that's what led them to evacuate the premises of their political bureau, which had historically been in Damascus. This was a very significant decision for the organization, but they felt trapped between their solidarity with the protesters and the past alliance they had with Syria. And at the beginning they tried not to choose, but then they chose and they left. So because they left already, they wouldn't be affected. For them, it wouldn't be a problem. Other groups that have more direct ties with Syria, like some of the older guards, splinters of the PLO, which would mark the Marxist splinters of the PLO, they would be affected, but they're so marginal anyways. So I wouldn't think it wouldn't be a big impact on Palestine. So these are the Iran, Hezbollah would be the countries affected positively, but then of course you would also have some countries being affected in a positive way, including of course Saudi Arabia, which is very much watching and helping any way you can to lead to that fall of Assad. They're also, just like Israel, they're also looking at Iran in doing so and strengthening their own influence in the region. And of course, the Gulf in general also has very similar claims to support the protesters as something that both they feel it's right, but also it would be politically convenient.
You said that some people know in Israel, or Israeli government agrees that the regime should change in Syria. Does it mean that Israel supports in any way the FSA or the protesters?
No, it doesn't, because first, it can't. The protesters in Syria are smart. They understand very well that getting any sort of assistance from Israel is, what you call a bear hug, the bear hug that suffocates you. They do not want to be affiliated with Israel. I think they're very much in the right in doing so. The regime from the beginning has been saying the protesters are Israeli and American agents. So this is something the regime has been saying from basically the beginning to discredit them, and the opposition knows. So the fact that there is no contact is by design, not by default. The opposition does not want that affiliation. Israel understands this. He understands this to the point that Prime Minister Netanyahu said a couple of times already in the past 2 years, said we don't want, but even if we wanted, we are not delusional enough to think that we could go and offer our assistance to the Syrian opposition and they would take it. It makes no sense. So Israel looks from the sidelines. It may very well want to bid farewell to Assad, but it doesn't have the tools to empower the opposition. Other countries are helping the opposition. Israel is not in this fight.
How do you explain that the Assad regime is still in power, the resistance?
I think that I think that the fact that Assad is still in power after 2 years is a reflection of a number of elements. One is the fact that over the past decades, since they came to power in the 70s, they basically made sure that the country was controlled and monitored very closely. Meaning they created a very strong, a very resilient, a very sophisticated system of coercion and control. And now this system of coercion, control, and oppression is something that is helping them to survive. In addition, militarily speaking, they are pretty sophisticated. They are able to fight the opposition. Also, so on the one hand, the regime is pretty strong, and it's also pretty united. those who fight for the regime, there have been defections. Most of the defections have come from the military, but overall, they're sticking together. You haven't seen large-scale defections. You have seen defections, but you haven't seen the army collapsing and everybody running home. That hasn't happened. That's one factor. The regime is internally strong. Two, Assad has been playing from the beginning the minority cards. He has been saying from the beginning, I am the defender of the minority, not just the Alawites. He also has been reaching out to the Christians and saying the same. He basically is trying to this classic divide or rule strategy, telling the minorities, if you don't stick with me, the opposition will basically make your life very difficult on all forms, including reprisals, including massacres. So he's playing very effectively this divide and conquer strategy, and he has been able to have the backing of his community, the Alawites. You can hear criticism coming from the community, but it's minority. The minority of the community is standing with the regime. So this is half of the picture. The other half of the picture, it's not because Assad is so good, but because it's the opposition that has not been, I wouldn't say it's so bad, but I would say it's very divided, it's fractionalized. They're all the time fighting within each other. They are fighting about what's the outcome. Within Syria, many groups are arguing that the outcome is political negotiation with the regime. The other half, from Istanbul, from Cairo, from wherever they're meeting, they're saying that the outcome is to get rid of Assad. And then even within these two camps, there are a lot of disagreements. So we have a united regime, an unpopular but united regime versus a popular but divided opposition. You end up with a status quo, with the stalemate.
So what can be the elements who can change the status quo, that overthrow Assad?
Yes. So, and this actually ties in with the element I forgot is external. That's the other element that I didn't mention. One of the other things that holds Assad together is the fact that it's counting with strong support, not just from regional players like Iran or Hezbollah, but I think most significantly from Russia. Russia's been important not just militarily, but it's been very important politically, because Russia's been able to veto any type of more forceful action against the Assad regime through their use of the veto in the UN Security Council. So I think that as long as the Russians will continue to back Assad, as they've been doing until now, he will have the feeling that more or less he's protected against international action against him. And I think that is one of the elements that gives him the confidence to continue and the incentive not to negotiate. Because from his point of view, with the backing of Russia and basically the virtual guarantee that there will be no military action, he can basically continue the war as long as he wants, because he's not losing. I don't think he's going to win either, but I think he has pretty much the freedom to do as he pleases, because he's not been facing any serious international consequences. So I think one of the really important elements is Russian support. The other element is, of course, the lack of more forceful international support for the opposition, and that's something that has been discussed very much in the past few months. So boosting military assistance, or recently the National Coalition asked for a no-fly zone. So this kind of military intervention would be a game changer, just like it was in Libya. But I also think that it's likely not going to happen, because the international community is not that interested in another military operation in Syria. So,
if at the end the Assad regime falls, which new regime will be favored by Israel? Which group?
Well, I think, and I guess here I'm speculating about what the government may think. Overall, the idea is if Syria is stable, this is better for Israel, because there's less instability, breeds insecurity, and that can lead to problems with the Golan. So overall, I think that any kind of government that would be stable and interested in fixing its own internal problems rather than confront Israel will be something that Israel would favor. Specifically, that means that what the media in the West defines as the moderates of the the moderate elements of the Syrian opposition, which, I mean, it's a problematic word all the time, but that group, so like the Syrian, the National Coalition and Khatib, although he resigned, this is probably the view of what Syria should look like that is mostly resonates within Israel, because it's a view of a country that would be stable, that would be after a conflict where minorities would be integrated. So I think that would probably be the preferred alternative, but I don't think Israel has that deep of a concern of who rules, as long as who rules is not interested in confronting Israel.
Because it can have a lot of consequences for Israel to have a new regime. But for example,
the peace.
The peace, exactly, can it lead to a regional war, and also about the Golanites?
Yes. That's what I'm saying. I don't think Israel cares who's in power, as long as who's in power is not interested in confronting Israel. In terms of peace, then of course that could matter a lot. But I don't think there is an assumption in Israel that a new regime would be interested in starting to deal with Israel as one of the first thing he does. Imagine a new country that is, a new regime that is dealing with a country internally torn apart by civil war, a number of really important issues to deal with. I really hardly doubt that they would have, one, the time, two, the political will, and three, the popularity to start their mandate by dealing with the negotiation with Israel. I don't think it's realistic. So I think the assumption is that there won't be any breakthrough in the short term. And also I think from an Israeli government's perspective, I'm not sure they're jumping up and down about the idea of negotiating about the Golan. I'm not sure. At least this government.
Do you think that the Muslim Brotherhood or another extremist Islamist group can arrive to power in Syria?
Well, I don't think the Muslim Brotherhood is I mean, depends how you define extremist. I mean, to me, it's one of those words that everybody uses in a different form. I would say that the Muslim Brotherhood are an Islamist party that has very different expressions in different countries. Their view, what their country may look like, may not coincide with mine, but extremism to me is more connected to the open use of violence. So I don't think the Muslim Brotherhood would fit in my definition. I mean, there is a chance that they would have a very large influence in what the post-Assad Syria looks like. Of course, it depends what happens. How is the transition? In the past few months, they've been the Muslim Brotherhood has been rising, also through the help, of course, of external parties' help, and they've been rising in their role and influence in the Syrian opposition. And as such, I'm pretty sure they will want to collect once the regime falls. But Syria is more complicated than that. I don't think there is a chance of one group getting clear domination over all the others. There are so many different sectors, so many different components to the opposition that I hardly think you would have a monolithic post-Assad government. So the Syrians, the Muslim Brotherhood would probably be important, but I don't think they would be the only ones.
And more extremist group?
Well, I feel from what I understand right now about al-Nusra's direction, they don't seem like someone who can be co-opted in a power-sharing government, and far less in a power-sharing government that comes through dialogue and seeks to integrate all different minorities and political views within Syria. So if their views and ideology doesn't go through some dramatic shift between now and the end of the conflict, I don't see them playing a particularly helpful role in the post-revolutionary transition. I also think that some of the people fighting right now are not Syrians. I'm talking about the more jihadist elements like al-Nusra. They have larger components on foreign fighters. I think that's something that not just Israel, but a number of regional countries, including Jordan, will be worried about what happens when the conflict ends and they seek to return to their homes after having fought for an Al-Qaeda splinter in Syria.
Would you say it's in Israel's interest to have a divided Arab world nearby, to be stronger as a Jewish state?
I think it would be in Israel's interest to have neighbors that have internal stability, prosperity, democracy. I think democracies tend not to go to war with each other. I think the more the rest of the region becomes prosperous, the better for Israel. I don't think division and internal conflict breeds anything good. And Israel can very well build high walls along all its borders, but many times you see the walls are not enough. And this idea that you can just be a fortress in the middle of a sea of hostility, I don't think it holds. I think if there is internal conflict all throughout the region, the instability will come to Israel. So I don't think conflict and instability and divisions are good. I think stability and peace are foster more stability and more peace.
And so are you afraid that with this conflict in Syria, this can turn in a regional war?
I think in a way Syria is already a regional war. It's a regional war the way Lebanon was a regional war. By regional war I mean all the most important regional players are involved. They may not have sent their armies, but they're very much involved. And this is one of the problems about the Syrian conflict that makes it so difficult to resolve the more it continues, that it's become a proxy battlefield for all the main regional powers to sort of battle by proxy, of course, for regional influence. So I think Syria is regional. There's no question that there's very strong regional, by regional I mean external influence on both parties, supporting them, advising them, giving them assistance. So it's regional. Would that become a regional war in the sense of different regional armies? I'm tempted to say that they won't let it get. It will not go that way. And this is why I'm using the Lebanese Civil War. The Lebanese Civil War was very much regional because every single warring party had a regional patron. And some of the regional patrons, like Syria, also brought in their troops. But mostly they were interested in keeping it contained. So in other words, Lebanon was paying the price for the rest of the region, and now Syria is paying the price for the rest of the region.
Last question. What will be your comment on the following statement? Syria's fall is the spring of Israel and America.
Oof. Okay, so first of all, whoever said this, it's not very precise. Meaning, what does it mean, Syria's fall? The fall of who? The fall of Assad? Because to me, Syria's fall is what's happening right now. Syria's fall is the fact that you have more than 80,000 casualties, the country is breaking apart, people have no food, have no shelter. This is Syria's fall. So no matter who wins, everybody is lost in this conflict. I think this is something that should be said up front. If Assad goes, I don't think it's a spring for Israel. I think that's really overly dramatic. I think Israel would not be crying. We will not be crying over the end of the Assad regime, and we'll be looking at Iran and thinking that now Iran is in a weaker position. And now everybody in Israel is obsessed about Iran, so it's Iran, Iran, Iran. But I don't think that's the spring. That certainly doesn't fix all the other problems the country has domestically, and it doesn't fix the main problem that is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think it wouldn't be something that Israel would regret, but I don't see how it fixes anything for Israel.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So before the current crisis in Syria, what was the overall strategy adopted by Israel dealing with the Assad regime since coming to power, and so before this crisis?
There was, I think, basically understanding that Syria can be a partner for peace, but Israel wanted peace on its terms, meaning without the Golan Heights. But there were many negotiations. We couldn't go into the details. But since the crisis started, the major position here is it's better to work with the devil that you know. This is Bashar. We know him, he's pragmatic, he's corrupt, but he's stable. We can talk to him. He also now, they say, he also controls the chemical weapons, so it's better him than the rebels. But then it changed. If you want to know about the change, I think the government has been struggling with this idea, should we support him or not? Only recently there was an article in Haaretz saying that Netanyahu, the prime minister, was a great supporter to preserve the Bashar regime, for the reason that I mentioned. But others, and you see it going, even the chief of staff yesterday said, and the minister of defense, more and more support for the rebels. But then again, there are different rebels in Syria. And of course, nobody, even not the Syrians, want to support Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda type of people. They want to support the mainstream, the main kind of the Sunni Muslims. Even the Muslim Brothers. The government not, but there is, what I'm trying to say, there is a debate, ongoing debate in the government and in the public about this, and they have not made up their mind.
And how does Israel look to Bashar al-Assad as a person, and also to the Syrian Ba'ath Party?
What do you mean they looked at him? What is the evaluation vis-a-vis Bashar?
Yeah.
No, he's looked by many as a murderer, following his father. His father did in Hama, 30,000 people were killed. Bashar exceeded him, and you have now 80,000 people killed and so many wounded and refugees and destruction. He's a real killer, and I'm still surprised that the Israeli government doesn't come out with a declaration that they denounce it and support the rebels, and also extend at least humanitarian help. Israel helps Japan, Haiti, the end of the world, next door. And where is the Jewish attitude, to help others, supposed to? And also politically, it can work, it can pay, because they are going to be one day the rulers of Syria, and Israel wants to be in good terms with them. And the main thing this is my position, Israel has to signal strategically to the Sunni Muslim world through supporting the rebels that we want to be part of the coalition vis-a-vis the main threat to the Sunni world and to Israel, Iran, Iran, Hezbollah, and what have you. So this is what should be done.
And how Israel sees, so we're going to do this one again. So what is Israeli opinion about the Syrian Ba'ath Party?
The Israelis are not concerned about the Ba'ath Party. Maybe some experts like me, but many don't. For them, Syria has a ruler who was a dictator, who was a butcher, and there are different groups of Muslim rebels. And this is the Ba'ath Party is not of interest to anybody. I can tell you that the Ba'ath Party or the Ba'ath regime has done a great deal for the peasants, for the workers. It was a socio-economic revolution under dictatorship, yes, but they improved a lot of many fallahin peasants in allocating land and education, a great deal of mobility of many. This is why not a few Sunni Muslims in Syria support the regime, because they benefited from the regime. Also Christians support the regime. So it's not otherwise vis-a-vis Sunni Muslims. It's more complex than that.
So is Israel wants to support the change of regime in Syria, or Israel want to maintain the same regime in Syria?
There are debates. There have been debates in the Israeli bureaucracy and government about it. Some say, let's maintain the regime because it's pragmatic, it's corrupt, we can work with it. The alternative could be the Muslim Brothers, the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. Everybody is scared about the Muslim Brothers, and I think it's a mistake. It's not true. So there are different views in Israel. Israel, 2 Jews, 4 views. There are so many views here. So there is no one view. What I'm trying to say that in the government, this was view to keep Bashar in power, but then it's changing all the time. And this, you can hear ministers and others say, no, we have to support the rebels. Even Lieberman that I agree with nothing with him, said some years ago that we have to support the rebels, humanitarian support. He was right. I think Israel should do more than that. So there is no one Israeli view.
And so before the crisis, Israel was supportive of Bashar al-Assad regime.
Sure, of course, supportive. I mean, Israel cannot do very much, but yes, they supported, because for many Israelis in the government, the regime of Bashar and before that of Hafez al-Assad, and since 1974, there was no problem in the Golan Heights. You know, Israel occupied the Golan Heights, put settlements. The Syrians did nothing. I mean, they talked, but no fire. I mean, once there was some sort of incident, but nothing. So it was very, very convenient for Israel to have safety on the Golan Heights.
Why, for example, Israel didn't try also to intervene in Jordan, Morocco, on the Gulf states, and it's more interested about Syria?
I don't understand.
Because some people say that Israel wants to have a change of power in Syria and get rid of Bashar al-Assad. So why Israel is more interested about changing the regime in Syria and not, for example, it was in Morocco or Jordan?
I don't know. Yeah, each country is different. In Syria, there is no Israeli ambition to change. What Israel wants is security. They don't care what kind of a regime it is. Bashar supplied the security, so it's okay. Now there is a dilemma because Bashar is about to collapse. Even the defense minister of Israel, Barak, who is now off, said after the beginning of the revolution that Bashar would not last for 3 weeks. And he was wrong. How does he know? So, as I said, there is no clear-cut opinion about it. Of course, other issues, Israel cannot change regimes. And Israel, for example, doesn't accept very gladly that the Arab Spring, so to speak, brought to power Muslim regimes in Tunisia, in Libya, in Egypt. What can Israel do about it? I would say this is the desire of the Arabs, and Muslim regimes are legitimate. Why not? We should talk to them. So we don't have any influence. And again, if you ask about Israel, there are different opinions about these issues. Even in the government, there are splits between the various factions.
Some senior Israeli officials said that the fall of Bashar al-Assad regime is strategic to Israel. Why? At what extent?
Strategic advantage? So this is again a view which is fairly new, that Bashar needs to fall. Why? Not because he's a killer. Strategically because he's a link to Iran and to Hezbollah, the axis of evil, so to speak, the Shia axis, which is a threat to Israel. So, and Bashar regime is a very, very strong element in this axis. So, if he falls, but Iran could be weakened or at least contained, you see, and this could help Israel strategically. It should go a step further and say that Israel, as I told you, Israel should unite or at least help or be part of the coalition, the Sunni Muslim coalition, because the Iranian threat is not only against Israel. It's more crucial against Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the oil producer states. Even Turkey is not very happy about it. So Israel should be part of this strategic network.
So would you say, if we say that Israel wants to get rid of the Assad regime, if we go with this theory, does Israel want just to get rid of the Assad regime, or is it something more behind it, maybe change the political structure of the country or even the economic structure of the country?
Israel doesn't have this kind of influence, no. I think what Israel could aspire for that the new regime in Syria will be united. I mean, united Syria, not split, because there is a danger of the Syria will split. A united country under the control of liberal Muslim government, even democratic, because again, in Israel there is conception that Islam and democracy don't go together, and it's wrong. It's wrong. Look at Indonesia. Look at even Egypt, Tunisia, and Turkey. There are many examples that, yes, it's not Westminster democracy. It's not French democracy. Democracies are not the same. So what I'm saying is Israel, the official Israel, just want a new government to be a stable one. This is what I think. I would add that I expect them to be also democratic and pluralistic. Why not? It can happen.
Before this crisis, to what extent the Syrian army was a threat to Israel? Was it or wasn't it?
No. Again, here the leaders exaggerate. We are surrounded by enemies, and it's not true. It's not true. Jordan is not an enemy. It's a friend, an ally. Egypt has a peace with Israel, and they're no threat. Syria, the Syrian army is not a threat to Israel because they don't have good airplanes any longer, the tanks. And Israel is a major power in the Middle East. Israel is stronger militarily, more than all Arab countries together.
And so still today, even with the crisis, the Syrian army is not a threat to Israel?
No. It was never a threat to Israel. Maybe in 1948. Even then, I doubt it very much. No. It's just exaggeration because the army wants more money for the budget. So they say, well, we have threats, we have threats. No threat. The threat is not of militaries, national military. The threat is of terrorism. This is the threat, the new threat, not only to Israel. I mean, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, in a sense Hamas, although I think we should talk to the Hamas, but this is a different matter. I'm in the minority.
In this context today, would you say that Israel can target directly or indirectly the Syrian army, the Syrian military?
Sure. If, for example, the Bashar would do this mistake, and he knows that to attack Israel in order, send some missiles into Israel, not just as was in the Golan, but something very serious, in order to divert the attention from his problem with the rebels into Israel, the enemy, then he will finish his position, because Israel will bomb. Israel can destroy the Syrian army, because the Syrian army is open. I mean, it's not airplanes, tanks, and they are all exposed, so Israel can destroy it. But both Bashar and Israel know that it's not going to happen. Bashar there were some talks that he's going to do it. He's not going to. In my opinion, he's not going to do it because he knows it's going to be the end of his rule. And Israel also doesn't want to intervene too much into the affairs of Syria.
Why do you think the Israeli aircraft target the military research center near Damascus a few weeks ago?
I don't know. Israel never admitted it. They admitted that only recently, yesterday, I think, Mr. Ya'alon, the defense minister, spoke about attacking the convoy that carried weapons to Hezbollah. That's what he said. About Damascus, I'm not sure, but maybe it did. I mean, Israel is not a saint. There are no saints in the Middle East. Israel attacked this because it probably produced chemical weapons or something. But I don't know exactly what was the target there. But yes, could be. Israel did it, yes.
It can happen again, would you say?
Sure. Well, and again, only yesterday, the chief of staff said, or minister, that if there are some problems like what we had with Hezbollah, chemical weapons, Israel is going to intervene.
So
to destroy, for example, chemical stockpiles of chemical weapons, yes.
So the nature of the targets will be more about what?
About the fear that chemical weapons and other heavy weapons will go to Hezbollah or would fall into the hands of Al-Qaeda, like Jabhat al-Nusra, something of this kind. Then Israel will intervene, maybe also Turkey.
We observed recently that some Israeli movements and military preparation in the Golan area. What are the objectives, the aim of this?
I think that mostly concerned about as I said, the Jabhat al-Nusra types, the more militant, because these are dangerous people, not only to Israel, to Syria itself, to the Muslim currents. I mean, even to the Ikhwan, the Muslim brothers are afraid of them. They're against one another. Even in Egypt, you have the same. So Israel is afraid that that more militant Muslims will take over areas near the Golan and be a nuisance or enemy to Israel. So this is why Israel massed some troops there to face this danger.
And is it true that the Israeli army also is readying itself to create security belt inside Syrian territory?
Each army has contingency plans, and maybe this is one of them. But you know what? It's going to be a big mistake, because Israel did it in Lebanon, South Lebanon, many years ago. This was a big mistake, to occupy lands of Arab countries. It could happen. Yes, I'm against it, but it could happen. Maybe Israel will do it only for a short time, vis-a-vis against these terrorist groups.
But it would be a bad idea for you to do.
Again, I'm not the prime minister. Far from it. I think it's better to do. I think that Israel should support verbally even more the rebels and come into terms with them, even now, when they are prepared to take over. The mainstream, the Free Syrian Army, the coalition of all of this. I hope, and maybe it's true, that Israel has some already contacts with them. This is why Israel has the Mossad, for example, to have these unofficial or informal contacts for the future.
And do you think if the Assad regime falls, what will be the consequences for the alliance between Syria, Iran, Hezbollah, and the Palestinian resistance?
Oh, it's a big question. Again, there are a number of aspects. If the Syrian regime falls, as I said earlier, it will weaken the Shi'i axis, the axis of evil, so to speak, Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah. It can take more power, give more power to the Sunni Muslim countries. And Jordan will be happy about it, because Jordan is under threat, and it's cooperating with Israel now, as you know, letting Israeli Air Force to use their territories. Now, the Palestinian issue is also connected, because if Israel wants to be part of this coalition, the Sunni Muslim coalition, Israel must advance to the settlement of the Palestinian issue, which is the main problem of Arabs and Muslims. It's Jerusalem, the Haram Sharif, Palestinian state, and so on. So this is very, very important. Israel should do it together, and Israel doesn't do it.
So the fall of the Assad regime can have consequences on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Yes. Again, this is in my eyes. Israeli government would not see it like that. They don't see. They say it in a very narrow issue. They don't connect the Syrian issue with the Palestinian issue.
But in practice, do the Israeli government try to overthrow the Assad regime? Do they help, for example, the Syrian opposition?
No, they should. They don't. They don't. Also, it's not easy. Because it can play into the hands of Bashar. Because if Israel, the enemy of the Arabs, is intervening, so it's imperialism and all of this stuff. So Israel is not going to do it. Also, there is a fear, not only of Israel, America too, and others, that weapons will fall into the hands of the more extreme, most Al-Qaeda types. This is the fear that Israel is concerned about it. I suppose there is humanitarian help, and there are some contacts with the leaders of the Syrian Free Army and others in Turkey, in Jordan. I don't think there is a military, massive military. Even the Americans, what they give the rebels is all kinds of equipment for fighting, but not weapons. The weapons they get from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, and from other countries.
So there is no official support to the Syrian opposition?
By Israel, no. So as I said,
can it result to the division of Syria into several nation states, or
not nation state, but ethnic or religious state? Yeah, this is a possibility that I suppose that Israel takes into account. That there could be in Al Jazeera, for example, northeast of Syria, could be already you have an autonomous Kurdish area in Jazeera. There are 2 million Kurds. There is this idea, the notion that the Alawites will retreat to their Jabal Latakia, Ansariya, Tartus, and have their own state. And maybe the Druze. It's a possibility. I think this is a slim possibility, in my opinion, that is going to happen. Because Druze, what are the Druze? They're not the nations, they're Arabs. They want to be part of Syria, eventually. Alawites are the problem, because they want to protect their life. And the Kurds also are a very serious problem, because it also has a bearing on Turkey. Because Turkey doesn't like to have another Kurdish autonomy. There is already one in Iraq, and the PKK can use it against Turkey. So it's a very complex situation, which means that it should be dealt with on a regional basis.
In the same context, many analysts in the world, including Arabs, consider that Israel has a major interest in the division of Arab countries on the basis of religious and national and ethnic.
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, Israel is not. I hope so. Not as stupid. They cannot do very much. It's mostly Arab propaganda to say Israel is want a split. There was a period when Israel did it, in the 50s. There was a theory of Ben Gurion of the periphery. Since the Arabs are enemies and they besiege Israel, we should reach to the countries beyond the Arab world, Turkey, Iran at that time, Ethiopia, and then also to be in touch with the minorities, like Maronites in Lebanon, Druze in Syria, Kurds in Iraq, in South Sudan. This was a theory at that time, not any longer.
Because if there is more minorities and not a majority, is it better for the state of Israel as a Jewish entity? To be stronger?
It used to. I mean, this was a theory many years ago. I think it's not relevant any longer. I mean, it's a problem, which it's in the Arab world. It's a problem. I mean, take Syria, what we're going on, Iraq too. I mean, there is a danger of split. Lebanon too, but Israel cannot do very much about it. And I'm not sure whether this is maybe it's the interest of some, yes, to create. I don't know if it's official, but maybe some people would like it to create some disunity inside the Arab world, yes. But it's not a deliberate policy. Maybe Israel would like it to happen, but I'm not sure whether Israel does anything to help it.
To your opinion, based on this crisis today in Syria, how do you think things will turn out there, militarily and politically speaking?
How they're going to turn out? Again, it's too soon to predict. And I can tell you what is my wishful thinking. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think that one scenario, which is good also for the Syrians, for the regime, for the a new regime, and for Israel is a Sunni, Muslim, pragmatic, moderate regime, and democratic too. And it is possible, in my opinion. But Israel cannot do very much about it, except for support the image. To say, come out, Prime Minister, we support a free, democratic Syria working with Israel, something of this kind. Yes, it's kind of a declaration of intention that Israel is supporting the Sunni Muslim population.
Are you afraid of maybe also a regional war if the crisis stays like this in Syria?
Yes, it could develop, especially if there is intervention, military intervention in Syria by Israel, which I don't think is going to happen, or by Turkey. Iran is going to intervene. Iran at least threatened to intervene. They told Turkey, if you are going to intervene, we are going to bomb the NATO bases in Turkey. And then you start something, and then a retaliation. Could be another scenario that Hezbollah will start something against Israel in order to divert the attention. And Israel has no sense of humor when it comes to Hezbollah. Israel can strike the Hezbollah, and then there will be retaliation from Syria. And then it can drag also Iran into it. I mean, you never know how things can develop. But it seems that the chances for this are slim now.
And so Israel is preparing itself in case of its regional war, or in case
Israel is prepared all the time. Not only this, they say it. I mean, we want the money for the military budget because we have so many enemies, which is exaggerated. But Israel prepares itself for anything, including what's going to happen. It can happen. But as I said, the chances are slim.
Last question. What is your comment on the following statement? Syria's fall is the spring of Israel and America.
Yeah, but you have to add to it something. Fall is one thing, yes, but you need another government which will be stable and pluralistic and democratic. This will be a prize for America and Israel. Not only the negative way as you presented, yes, it's going to be important, but who is going to rule? Because the Syrian follower regime, okay, but then Syria can split, as you said, to a number of entities. This is not so good. I think it should be a stable government, and as I said, pluralistic, democratic, pro-West, or part of this also Sunni Muslim coalition.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. So will Israel be afraid if the Muslim Brotherhood or other extremist groups take over Syria?
Well, we have, Muslim brothers in Egypt, and the regime is committed to maintain the peace agreement between Israel. There is nothing you should be afraid of. Of course, more secular regime or pro-Western will be welcomed by Israel. But, if that's what happened, that's, I think, is okay. But we have to make the differentiation, and there is a difference between Muslim brothers, which I don't consider them as radical, and Al-Qaeda and other radical jihadist group. That's a different story. Taliban or Al-Qaeda control over Syria will be extremely dangerous, not only for Israel, for Jordan, for Lebanon, for Iraq, for Turkey. But I don't think it will happen.
Some people say that maybe Israel has an advantage if the civil war continues for a long time in Syria.
Well, for the time being, the Assad regime is still there, still keeps the border quiet, but very weak, very busy with its own affairs. Al-Qaeda presence there, well, Al-Qaeda activists are after the regime, not after Israel. So, of course, that in the short run, it can serve Israel interests. But in the long run, you have an interest in having a strong and stable regime which can serve as you need an address, and the strong regime means a clear address that you can address whenever there are problems along the border. So I think that in the long run, it is in the interest of Israel that the civil war will come to an end, and you will have a stable Syrian government.
Is it also good for Israel if, for example, the Arab world is more and more divided into several groups? Is it better for Israel as a strong Jewish state?
Well, division among the Arabs, it's not something new. I mean, since the 70s, when Egypt signed its peace agreement with Israel, then the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, when was the last time there was an Arab unity about something? But I think that united Arab world, well, the Arab Peace Initiative, well, it is in the interest of Israel that you have a strong Arab commitment to peace. I mean, in order to pursue peace and to promote peace, you need a strong partner. And if a unity can achieve on this issue, it is in the interest of Israel. I don't think, Arab world is divided. Most Arab countries are focusing on their own domestic affairs. Iran is threatening the Gulf. I don't think that it really makes any difference for Israel whether there is more unity, less unity. But all in all, chaos is not in the interest of Israel.
Does Israel also consider that the conflict in Syria today is only between the opposition and the regime?
Well, there is no one war, many wars. The Iranians against the Saudis, the Turks against the Iranians, the Russians against the Americans, the Sunni against the Alawites, the peasants against the urban centers, the periphery against the center. So many wars. So it started as a social protest, but now it depends, there are many conflicts that you can identify now, many tensions that you can identify right now in Syria.
And how can it turn out, to your opinion, military and politically speaking in Syria?
Well, eventually, the regime on the one hand, this coalition of so many groups, factors, elements, which is giving a fight against it. It depends, attrition war, and the one who will survive. That's a war of survival, The side which will survive will be the winner.
And do you have an idea about which group can survive?
It's very hard. The regime is bleeding. On the other hand, it's still there. It's very difficult to say. Rebels can get tired. Who knows? But till now, they did quite well. So it's very difficult to say. We need to be patient. In Tunisia, it was a matter of days. In Egypt, it was a matter of weeks. In Libya, it was a matter of months. Here, it's a matter of years. So another year, but eventually, it will come to an end.
Do you think it can escalate or lead to a regional war?
I doubt it very much, because the regime knows that it's against its interests to find itself in a war. The only way to survive is to limit the scope of the war and to prevent foreign intervention. So I doubt it very much. It may have some implication over Lebanon, Jordan, Israel even, Turkey. But I doubt it very much whether we are heading towards regional conflict. Why do you need a conflict inside Israel or along the border or inside Jordan if they are fighting inside Syria? All sides, Syria became the battleground. No need for another battleground.
Last question. What is your comment on the following statement? Syria's fall is the spring of Israel and America.
No, I don't know. Syrian fold, there is one aspect, the collapse of the axis of evil, or what we call, the alliance between Hezbollah and Iran. If Israel believes that Iran is the major threat, so in this regard, well, I wouldn't say spring, but Israel can benefit. It can serve Israel's interests. But the problem of Israel, the challenge, I wouldn't say problem, is as far as its relation with the Palestinians is concerned, and it will change nothing as far as Israeli relations with the Palestinians and all the conflicts and disputes with the Palestinians. That's the main issue. That's the main challenge Israel is facing. So this regime, that regime, I mean, we had, I wouldn't say wonderful relations with, but a quiet border for so many years. Now it might be less quiet and border. Still, it's not the main issue. It's not the main challenge.
And if, for example, the new regime in Syria, is more willing, I don't know, to support Palestinian groups, it can change something for Israel?
No, I mean, this regime supported Hamas, provided Hamas with advanced weapon. I mean, to the degree nothing can be done better and in more larger scale than what this regime did for, Hamas, providing them with weapons. So the only thing is, no, I mean, even the leaders of the Syrian opposition said, we are interested in getting back the Golan Heights. We prefer to do it through a political process. So that's, I guess, what we should expect of any future Syrian government.
So Israel will take also contact with the new regime?
I think that's what Israel is interested in, but I guess that any given regime will ask first for the return of the Golan Heights, and then, if it will be a regime which is backed by the Americans, there will be American pressure on Israel. It will be an interesting period for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.